Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining our Inspira Advantage webinar on how to craft a memorable personal statement. My name is Hallie Caldwell, and I'm a part of the Inspira Advantage team. Inspira Advantage is a company that helps med school applicants prepare basically from start to finish to apply to med school, from beginning to decide whether or not you want to go to med school, building your candidacy, deciding what schools to apply to, writing personal statements, filling out applications, all the way through actually getting accepted. We're kind of there for the whole process. We're excited to have you join us today to talk about personal statements. We have two great panelists with us who are consultants for quad education and work with applicants and are very knowledgeable on this subject. So today we're going to cover just the basics of what is the personal statement, the purpose and importance of it, and talk about brainstorming and picking a topic, the structure your personal statement should take, some tips and tricks, some do's and don'ts, and then we'll open things up for Q&A. So today we have Callie and Jennifer with us. Callie, can you give us a little introduction on yourself?
Yeah, hi there. I'm Callie. I'm originally from Iowa, went to University of Iowa for undergrad, and am now a fourth year at Yale School of Medicine applying into psychiatry for residency.
Great, thanks so much for being here. Jennifer, welcome. Can you give us a little intro on yourself?
Yes, hi, I'm Jennifer. I'm currently a first year resident, so an intern in OBGYN at Duke University. I graduated from Mayo Clinic just this past summer, and I'm originally from Ohio, and I'm excited to be living in the South where it is much warmer than it is in Ohio.
All right, well, thank you both for joining us. I'm glad you could be here. So we'll dive right in and just talk about what is the personal statement. Callie, you want to take this?
Sure. So your medical school personal statement will basically just ask you to answer the question, why medicine? And you get a page to do that. That's 5,300 characters. That includes spaces. That's about 500 words of single-spaced. Page is at 1.5 spaced. But regardless of your medical pathway, you'll have to write a personal statement essay for your medical school application.
Oh, sorry about that. So purpose and importance. Jennifer, you want to talk a little bit about this?
Yes, so there are kind of three main goals of why personal statements are a required part of your application. The first goal is to describe, who are you? You have an opportunity to tell medical schools who you are beyond just what's in the more quantitative portion of your MCAS application. So it's a way for schools to see a little bit more into you as a person, into your personality, and how you might be a good fit for their institution. The second goal is to describe your motivations for going into medical school. So you should use your personal statement as an opportunity to tell schools why you want to be a doctor, what kind of doctor you want to be, and why they should understand your motivations for pursuing this path. And the third point, or the third purpose, is just a way for you to express your abilities as a communicator, since communicating is such a big job. It's such a big part of our role. So it's a way to look at your written communication skills and how you can answer, this question and use just a limited amount of space in a really concise, impactful way.
Great. Callie, do you have anything? I know that covered a lot of it, but do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I think that mostly covers it. I think that you really can get personal with a personal statement. Make it your own, explain what your goals are, what you want to do, where you're coming from, all of that. And it also goes miles if you have a well-written personal statement, which might be obvious, but it makes it so much more enjoyable to read on the admissions committee.
All right, so brainstorming and picking a topic. Callie, I think we're back to you.
Yep. So in order to pick a topic, you want to start off by brainstorming and figuring out basically what is the topic you want to cover. So the AAMC recommends considering the 4 components, which are your motivation, like your initial inspiration for going into medicine, your fit, saying what values and qualities you have and how they apply to becoming a physician, your capacity, which is as you as a future doctor align with the competencies of a medical professionals, and vision, which is what you want to end up doing with the field.
Jennifer, do you have anything to kind of add to this?
No, I think that kind of covers everything. I think that it's a great place to start, and then you kind of branch off from those 4 steps into really tailoring it into what you want to share with admissions committees.
Great.
So as you begin brainstorming, the AAMC also recommends you consider.
Oh, this is
that's
just a different layout here. Follow-up questions.
Yeah, perfect. Follow-up questions. So kind of, describing what you're just saying about diving kind of more into the details. So when you're brainstorming, really kind of think about why you want to pursue a career in medicine, why you see yourself as a doctor, what kind of doctor you want to be, who do you want to be for your patients, and then maybe what unique aspects that you can bring to your patient care.
Yeah, and I'll just add in that when you're thinking like what kind of doctor you want to be, that doesn't necessarily mean specialty. That could mean like, are you working with a specific patient population, or like, specific goals within the field of medicine, or do you want to do more like research or whatnot? Like, it doesn't have to be, I'm going to be this specific kind of surgeon necessarily. Like, a lot of people, they know that most people end up changing their minds, so I wouldn't focus too much on that part of it.
It's a great addition there, I think. Definitely something important to think about outside of what exactly you want to specialize in.
Yeah. And then some anchor points about thinking about the narrative you're trying to convey. It's helpful to think about what qualities you want to highlight in yourself. So you can start by creating a list of like some significant formative memories, or thinking about stories that were impactful to you. Patient stories are really helpful here, showing your interactions with the patient. But once you start listing them all, you could also think, what qualities would you want to see in your doctor, such as some examples listed here, like leadership, compassion, empathy, analytical ability, persistence, and optimism. And then from that, you can start to cull it down and figure out which are the strongest points you want to hit on.
Great. Jennifer, anything else you want to add to this?
No, I think that a lot of times it can be kind of hard to think of what qualities you want to highlight. And I feel like there's a lot of great resources online, including on the AAMC website, of just different competencies that they think students should be achieving. And I think that's a great place to kind of start as you're brainstorming things that you want to try to highlight.
Great. When talking about these qualities, I'm assuming that we don't want to kind of list qualities that we think med schools want to see in us, but rather qualities in ourselves that would make us a good doctor. So not tailoring it to the med school specifically or telling them what they want to hear, but you want to speak, either of you want to, is that correct, would you say, or?
Yeah, like really genuine. Like, I think one of the most important parts of a personal statement is to have it be genuine. Which, and like really like sing your own story, or sing your own song, tell your own story, however you want to say it, versus like, I think if you work backwards from like thinking what they want to hear, then everyone's going to start to sound the same.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so for developing your I did the last one, never mind, sorry.
No problem. For developing your narrative, a good place to start is the why. So explaining why you decided to go through an experience and explaining your motivations, what drew you into it, how did you feel trying to place the reader, the admissions committee into that experience and make them relatable to them. Your audience is going to be your admissions committee. and really explaining how it affected you. How did you grow from this experience? What did you learn? How are you going to apply it? How has this influenced you? And what are you going to use this for as you start pursuing your career? And it's a great opportunity to talk about the different qualities, like we mentioned, how you learned new qualities or how you grew and evolved from old qualities that were strengths of yours.
And I think a really helpful part, a helpful part of developing your narrative is this is kind of like a little bit later in the drafting stages, but it's helpful to have, if you can have things tied, if you can connect the dots a bit more and have kind of a thread go throughout, but it's more important to figure out what exactly you're trying to say first. Yeah.
All right.
All right, so before you do that step, it's important to create an outline. So pick 2 to 3 qualities and make a bullet list for each quality that you'll be talking about in your essay. And then for each quality, have an experience that conveys that quality. This is, moments that are really memorable to you, and definitely use imagery. And then reflecting on your career path. So tying your qualities and experiences back to what makes you want to pursue medicine. And this is where everything can come together to show why you're passionate about medicine, that you wish to further your career, and how you would use your education once admitted to medical school.
Yeah, and I would just add that this isn't an exercise that you're really doing in isolation. This is kind of what you're going to be doing when you're crafting your whole application. You're going to be really referencing and going back to these qualities, these motivations when you're describing your different activities, and when you're asking different letter writers and their letters of recommendation for qualities you want them to highlight. So you're really kind of presenting this consistent, cohesive package to committees about who you are as a person and a future doctor.
Mm-hmm. Very well said.
Okay, so things to keep in mind. Is your story unique? Does it encompass your identity and experience? And do you explore your qualities and relate them to your experiences?
All right, so we'll talk a little bit about the structure and organization of your personal statement.
Yeah, so things to include, does not have to be the order you write these in, but at the end of the day, what the end result would be is a powerful and intriguing introduction. You really want to draw people in, make the first line is the most important line, for sure, to make them want to keep reading the rest of your statement. And then anecdotes showing your character, what kind of person are you? That's honestly a huge part of what the personal statement's getting at, is just like, what's your personality? What kind of person are you? And what qualities make you who you are? And then having deep and meaningful reflection on how your experiences have impacted you and what they mean to you. And then connecting that to why that logically led to medical school, have your story make sense and flow together. And then a conclusion that ties everything together.
Jennifer, any other thoughts here?
I think that just when you look at this slide, like it sometimes can be really intimidating. Like I have to include all these 5 things, and like, where do I start, and how am I supposed to create this from scratch? And if you just kind of remember going back to the steps we just talked about the brainstorming and writing your qualities and really kind of starting from that, a lot of this just grows organically. And a lot of times people are really surprised about how this kind of just naturally starts coming together once you have started with that brainstorming session and really kind of going back to the basics and thinking about what brought you here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think something else that can be helpful if you're feeling overwhelmed is, at least this is, I remember what I did. I think I wrote it in my notes app or a Google Doc or something less intimidating than a Word document, and just like journaled about my life for like a few pages and like random all over the place. And then from that, like if you have like a no pressure, just like word vomit anything that might be relevant, from that you can usually find things to then like actually write about. But I wouldn't sit down and be like, I'm now going to write the first paragraph of my personal statement. Like that's like an insurmountable goal.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
It sounds like to sit down to write this, you don't necessarily need to know exactly what you want to be talking about story wise, or you shouldn't expect it to just kind of flow out of you. So some tips and tricks here.
Okay, tips and tricks about the process. So viewing your personal statement as part of the process and rather than the final product. I think kind of what you're talking about, putting just a lot of pressure on it, and just remembering that this is just a piece of the whole puzzle, and that nobody is only getting into and out of medical school just based on their personal statement alone. It's just one of the ways that people are getting to know you. And then don't forget to get personal, that it's really an opportunity to share something meaningful and emotional, and remembering that this is a way for people to get to know you before they actually get to meet you. And what would you want to share with them? What would you want someone to know about you that doesn't just jump out from the numbers about you on a page? Show, don't tell. I feel like that's a really kind of common phrase that people use a lot, but it's really important to kind of back up everything you're saying with stories and with evidence, and really finding ways to demonstrate how you're using those strengths rather than just saying, I have those strengths.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, kind of like with everything, doing your own background research, looking at different examples, samples. I know Inspira has a lot of resources on their website, talking to a lot of people, reading friends' personal statements, just kind of doing your typical data collection and getting really familiar with the process.
Hallie, do you have anything else to add here?
Yeah, the more opinions you can get, generally the better. Especially like your pre-med advisor, your letter writers, when you send your letter writers your personal statement, for them to write your letter. Also ask them for feedback if there's anything that they think that you should change, is a really helpful thing. I think also when it talks about getting personal, I think a really helpful rule of thumb is if anyone else could write that sentence, then don't include it. Like, have it be something that only you could say. That's a little dramatic, but like I think the sentiment carries, in terms of like, have it be a story that they're not going to mix you up with anyone else. They're going to hear about you and want to get to know you. That's the big part of the personal statement. Is having them be curious about you, to want to learn more about you at an interview.
I love that. It's a great tip. So do's and don'ts, I anticipate we'll spend a good couple minutes on these. I think this is kind of the questions everyone has and that we hear a lot.
Yeah, so some of this we've been touching on a little bit throughout, but to start off with the proofreading, you really want to, after you write a draft, so let it sit and get cold before coming back to it. Don't try to, this is not like a cramming kind of endeavor, like give yourself lots of time to keep editing. Like I think for my residency personal statement, I ended up landing on draft number 14, which you don't have to do that many, but like, don't anticipate to just write it in one draft. With getting personal, we're mentioning this before. Just really wanting them to get to know who you are and what's unique about you. And talking about how your qualities relate to your experience. You really want to have this cohesive narrative and not just have it be this like your life can sometimes feel scattered in all the things that you've done, but it's important to tie the narrative together. Also writing in first person, that is very important. Talk about things from your perspective and making your experiences relatable. So using simple language that tells your story in a way that's easy to follow. This is not like don't write like having it be super poetic or like, you want it to be unique and creative to some extent, but this is not a creative writing exercise. You want it to spell out what you're trying to say. Also being genuine, speaking about things that are truly meaningful to you, that will show through or stand out. And being original. So like you read so many personal statements, you don't want yours to blend in with everyone else. Try to think about what experiences you've had that other people might not have and that make you unique to medicine. Also giving yourself enough time, was just talking about that earlier. It's really never too early to start working on it, or at least starting brainstorming. And then reviewing and revising. a million times over again is very important. Get as many people as you can to read it.
This isn't on here, and I don't know if we touch on it, but kind of what would both of you recommend a good timeline for starting a personal statement? Like how early did both of you begin thinking about it, or do you recommend to your clients that they begin thinking about this?
Yeah, I agree that it's really never too early to start thinking about it. And I think that people have different processes, and some people kind of like to have a few different things going at once. And so maybe they're kind of working on their activities section. They're also kind of starting to outline their personal statement, kind of around January, February, kind of March, time. Other people like to really kind of like dig in and tackle things kind of one at a time. Like, I'm going to do my resume first in January, February, then I'm going to finish my activity descriptions, and then I'm going to spend, March, April, May, just on my personal statement. So I think that there's some flexibility, but you definitely want to leave a few months before applications are due, because you want to send it to a lot of people, just like Hallie said, for feedback. And you want to be able to give, your busy letter writers and, other people that you're asking for enough time to get you back really good feedback. And so you're not just kind of emailing them in a frenzy in June, like, hey, can you get this back to me in 3 days? I have to submit in 2 weeks. So it's really kind of, I like to say, like, after the new year, kind of heading into spring is when you should start thinking about it.
Yeah, very much agreed. This is not like a class essay that you can write in a couple weeks. This is something that takes a lot of time.
All right.
Okay, what not to do, regurgitate your resume or application. I feel like I see this all the time, where it's like the first paragraph is, this is what I did in high school. And the second paragraph is like, this is what I did in college. And this is what I did in my gap year. And that's what they have your resume for in your activity section. This is just such a different opportunity to share stuff that's not in your resume, and you shouldn't waste that opportunity. Don't use a lot of cliches. People read a lot of these essays and they all kind of start to blend in, especially when you're super superlative and really over exaggerated. I think the overshare and trauma dump, when there's kind of a fine line between being personal and being overly personal, and anything you're not comfortable talking about in person, you shouldn't share, and you shouldn't try to shock and awe people. I think that this isn't really the avenue for that. Using simple language that's expressive, but not trying to show off and be too scientific or use really big words. Make sure you're adhering to all of the different limits, because AMCAS will cut you off even if you don't think it will. It will literally delete you in the middle of a word. And don't ramble. I think this is something also that we all tend to do under pressure. You think that you have to fill all of the space, but if you have something that's really beautiful and maybe is 200 words under the limit, don't feel like you have to waste that space with something that's unnecessary.
Yeah, very much agreed. Yeah, I think like fluff is very easily seen, so it's always better to cut that out. Like just delete the fluff and things that like don't feel like, you have to use every single character. And I think also, with the oversharing and all of that, it's very delicate. You want to talk about some of the most deeply personal parts of your life, but you don't want things to be like a sob story or to be super sensational or anything like that. And I think also like with cliches, I think I'll just like name a couple that I think are really, really common of things to avoid. And like there's probably a way to do all of these well in some way, but I think things that get done a lot are like, when I was 10, I broke my leg and then I wanted to be a doctor.
Yes.
That's super common, and like everyone's been to the doctor before, so that's like not, that's not true. A lot of people have been to the doctor before.
Yeah.
And that's not a particularly compelling reason to just like a one-off, I broke my wrist or something, is not like a reason to pursue medicine. I'm trying to think of other cliches.
I feel like the like service trip. Like I spent 1 week doing one thing in some faraway place, and that's why I want to do medicine. I feel like that's like a very common cliche as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, a cat.
I know.
And I think another one, like this one, I think there's a way to do it potentially, but I think something that also is really common is like my like elderly grandmother died and there was a doctor there and they were nice. Like that is done a lot. And I think there are ways you can probably make a story about, there are a lot of ways you can make a story about a family member being ill or you being part of your story, but having it be like, you know, like your 90-year-old grandma passing away at hospice isn't necessarily that unique.
Yeah.
One piece of advice I've heard kind of around that is to, if you're going to talk about another person and particularly their like medical history, is to make sure you're framing it with yourself. And so it's a small piece of the story, but make it about you and like just a small piece of it. You're not writing about someone else. It's not a biography.
Right.
Yeah,
It'd be about
really good point.
It'd be like your experience taking care of them or something like that, not their experience.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other things that we didn't really hit on in this slide that you think are like overly common topics or just things that you see often that people do kind of in all of these veins that they should be avoiding, or you encourage your students to kind of rephrase or kind of rethink?
One of my biggest ones that is like a huge pet peeve of mine is proofreading. Like you would be surprised how many people do not check for spelling and grammar, or they just hit spell check and you're like reading through sentences and you're like, this is like not grammatically correct. And like, I know you are a very intelligent person who's very accomplished, and like you just make sure you're also spending the time, like not just coming up with your beautiful story, but like following basic rules of English. Like that's very important too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that can't be said enough. I think, another cliche that I've seen done is like everyone in my family is a doctor, so therefore I should be a doctor.
Yeah.
That's not a reason to become a doctor. There are things you can say that you learned from family members in medicine.
Yeah.
It makes it sound like, oh, my parents want me to do this, so I'm doing it, which is like a big red flag.
Yes.
Yeah, that's all fantastic information. I think I'm just going to add this in. One of my favorite pieces of advice I got from someone was like, with complicated language and personal statements and essays, is don't use a $25 word if a 25-cent word will do.
Yeah.
Don't make someone use a thesaurus or a dictionary.
Yeah. So true.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll open things up for Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to pop them into the Q&A box. And while we wait for that, Callie, Jennifer, I'll throw a couple of questions your way. What process did both of you take to write your personal statements? And what would you have done differently knowing what you know now? Put you on the spot there, I'm sorry.
So I mentioned earlier with my process of like notes app word vomiting to start with. And then I like really had a lot of like honest conversations with myself, for lack of a better word, about like why I was doing this and like what some of my most impactful experiences were and what I wanted out of the future. And so I think a lot of the work of the personal statement started before I ever even like actually started writing. And I think that, and yeah, it took a lot of drafts, like many drafts, and many people. Like also, sorry, this is a tangent, but another thing that can be helpful is at your university too. There's oftentimes writing centers that are have people who don't necessarily, they're not like pre-med people, but they are really helpful for language. And can be helpful in how you phrase things. They can be a really invaluable asset because they're like English majors or whatever. sorry, I remember going there and that was really helpful. But I'm trying to think about what I would do differently now, what I know now. I know there's definitely things to improve. I don't know if Jennifer, you want to go while I think on that a bit more.
Yeah, I think what I would do differently, I think that when I was trying to describe my kind of like journey and why I wanted to go into medicine, I tried to cram too much into an essay, and I also had a ton of iterations and a lot of drafts, and it took a lot of time. And I think kind of just going back to the basics of like highlighting that one or two qualities or that kind of one meaningful story. If I'd kind of started from there, I would have saved myself a lot of time instead of, I was one of those people who tried to like list too many different motivations and too many reasons why. And it didn't make that kind of cohesive story, which is ultimately what your personal statement is. It's supposed to be like a short story. And, if you kind of think about any TV show or book or anything, article that you read, it should be concise and make sense and kind of short and sweet and to the point. And so I don't know, that was kind of a struggle for me at first. And that's advice that I try to pass on, is really don't try to go too broad in your scope and really focus on one or two things, because you don't have a lot of room. Those pages fill up very quickly.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I think something I would have done differently looking back on it is that I would have been a little bit more personal with my identity and how that relates to medicine. This is something that I didn't really think about when I was writing my personal statement as much, and then ended up writing about it in secondaries. But like, I, for example, grew up on a farm and first generation college graduate, like come from a place where there's very limited access to physicians. I think those are all things that I could have definitely woven into my motivations to go into medicine, the unique qualities I bring. So I think that in general, like it's okay to be personal about things. Like you don't need to be cagey.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too about the secondaries. And like, I guess kind of going back to my first point, like that pressure to try to fit everything into one statement, like it's your only shot to get these kind of points across. And just remembering that you do have a whole application. This is just one piece. You have your activities to show who you are as a person. You have your most meaningful activities. You've got your secondaries, and you'll have your interview. There's a lot of ways to show you're a complete package. And so just focusing on your personal statement, just being one really good piece of that and not trying to include everything.
I know you both touched on this a little bit, but like, what are some tips that you have to really narrow things down? Jennifer, you mentioned it's not a lot of space, and people could probably write multiple pages, chapters, books on kind of they want to be a doctor and all of those experiences. How do you kind of decide what's the most important and really narrow that down?
I think uniqueness is a really helpful thing. Like a lot of people have similar experiences volunteering and doing research and stuff, but like what about these experiences do you have is unique to you? I think that I don't know if it'd be helpful to like list off examples of like things people talk about in their personal statements, but
if you have some that are relevant, feel free.
And like I think that like examples I've either seen or have written about myself or things are like volunteer experiences, being like at a suicide hotline or like an abortion clinic, or having like it doesn't have to be involved with medicine necessarily. You can talk about like theater or art or figure skating, or like all these other things too, and then like craftfully connect that to medicine somehow. But like also a lot of it's just sharing about you. I think other unique experiences with identity and like access to education, like personal journeys, those are all really helpful.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Some of my favorite personal statements that I've read from like friends and clients have been the ones about experiences that weren't directly related to medicine, but just showed who they were as a person and how they grew, that time they spent teaching or traveling, or about where they came from, or volunteering somewhere. I think that really just focusing back on the qualities and who you are as a person more than, and we talked about this at the very beginning, more than what you think people want to hear. That just makes such a more compelling story.
With that, if you're writing about something that's not necessarily like directly connected to the medical field or the medical profession, is it important to tie it back to that, or can you kind of be a little bit more broad with it, and not kind of go deep into why that experience made you want to be a doctor, so to speak?
I think you should definitely tie it back. I think that's kind of what the last paragraph of any personal statement is kind of, when we talk about that structure, you spend this time developing the story, but you should always kind of end on why this ties back to medicine, how this is going to make you a better doctor, why you ended up choosing this path, because you don't want to assume that people are going to understand your message. This isn't a time to be super abstract or kind of poetic. You should kind of really make it clear how this experience and what you learn from these experiences is going to be directly relatable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And going off of that too, like, even if you're like, oh, this like really unique experience I have was unrelated to medicine and didn't make me want to be a doctor per se, that's okay, as long as you can say this shows a skill set of mine that I think would be then advantageous for a doctor to have. You can also connect it that way.
Yeah.
One question that get quite often is kind of like, how important is your personal statement, like when you're reviewing applications? If you have kind of a fairly okay MCAT score, decent grades, like kind of in the middle of everything, like just how much does a personal statement make or break your kind of application? And like, if you have kind of mediocre grades, could you get into like a top tier med school if your personal statement is perfect? Like, how much can it boost you or not? And like, what's realistic there?
I don't know how you feel, Callie, but I just feel like nowadays there's a shift into looking at packages or applications holistically. And I think that schools are really moving a little bit away from, most schools are moving away from, you're more than just your numbers. Mm-hmm. So I think it is important. And I think it's also an opportunity to maybe explain why you have other strengths than maybe what's shown in your application. So maybe you aren't the best test taker, or, maybe you didn't go to the best undergrad school, but this is kind of what you can offer. I think it could be an incredibly important opportunity. But, also still remembering that it's still just a piece of your application. But I think that if you play it correctly, it can be extremely beneficial and really powerful tool.
Yeah, no, I agree so much. I think the way things used to be said, that your application is in this like proverbial envelope, and on the outside is your GPA and MCAT score, and then on the inside is the rest of the application. It depends what those scores are if they read the rest of the application. Yeah. And things have been moving away from that. Like a lot of programs will read everyone's personal statement regardless of what their scores are. That being said, if you like at certain programs, there are at least soft cutoffs in what you have to score to be considered. But I think that a personal statement can really either make or break an application.
Mm-hmm.
Another question is kind of how creative can you get with your personal statement, kind of outside of like the introduction, kind of body explaining, conclusion? Can you really go into like kind of short story format? Can you get creative with just how you're writing it? Or does it kind of need to be a little bit more formulaic?
I think in general, it's better to err on the side of being very clear to read and understand. I think that, some people start with like a setting the scene of like a particular experience and then do their like, and then that was how this relates to everything else. And here's like kind of like a hook before their rest of their statement. But I think in general, you really want this to be something that you could like outline and connect A to B to C to D.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I 100% agree. I think when you were writing your college essays, you kind of had a lot more leeway in being creative. And we all kind of heard those stories about people who like just wrote haikus or like treasure maps or something for their applications. I don't think that this is a space to do that. And just kind of remembering that this is going to be read by a committee of medical students and doctors who maybe aren't always the most like artistic, creative arts types. And like, this is maybe not the place to like show off your like fiction writing skills. There's other ways and places you can do that. I don't think that this is the space.
So turning this into a song, it might not be the best idea.
No, maybe in your interview if you really want to go out on a limb and show that off, but yeah, I don't
as
think
a
that
hobby.
Yeah,
I think that's the appropriate place for things like that.
yeah.
Great. I think that's kind of all the questions here. Callie or Jennifer, do either of you have any other thoughts? Anything that think last minute tips, advice that you have about personal statements? Aside from like start early and edit, revise and edit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a personal statement. It's okay to be personal, and yeah, tell your story.
Yeah. I think it's really hard to share it with a lot of people because it is so personal, and I think it can be really scary to put yourself out there like that. But it's so important to get a lot of people's feedback, and I think different kinds of people too. Like I had my mom read mine and friends, and then my letter writers, and then just like a faculty mentor, and just being able to incorporate all of their different opinions and kind of see like the different perspectives. It was really good to make it more well-rounded, but it's very scary to like send it off because it's like a little piece of yourself, but just kind of remembering it's all just to help you grow and to help it grow.
Mm-hmm. Very well said.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much for being here. It was great to talk to you both. Callie, it was great to see you again. And Jennifer, I'm sure we'll be having you back in the future.
Yeah.
And to everyone that joined, thanks so much. We'll send out an email the next day or so that has a recording of this webinar. Feel free to pop onto the Inspira Advantage website, learn more about us. If you want to schedule a consultation, you can have a free consultation to learn more about how we can help you with any part of your application, your personal statement, and how you can work with people like Jennifer and Callie to kind of walk you through that. But I hope everyone has a great night. And Jennifer and Callie, thank you so much again for being here and sharing all of your information.
Thank you.
Of course. Thanks for having us. This is great.
Okay. Take care, everyone. Good night.
Good night.